afternoon, everyone. Today, after a long time, we are meeting for a lecture in person. And today we have with us Dr. Jyoti Atwal and Professor Eunan. And both of them will be speaking on the topic India-Ireland freedom struggle in a historic perspective and its spiritual and revolutionary connections. First, I would like to give a brief introduction of both the speakers. Dr. Jyoti Atwal is Associate Professor of Modern History at the Center for Historical Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in India and a visiting Associate Professor for the period 2022 to 2027 at UCD School of History. From 2017 till August 2022, she held position as Adjunct Professor at Department of History, Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences at University of Limerick. She is also a member of the Advisory Board of Ireland-India Studies Centre Cork at University College Cork and for projects at UCD. Since 2012, she has been associated with the prominent universities of Ireland in different capacities. She specializes in gender history and transnational history of India and Ireland in the colonial and post-colonial context. Her latest publications on Ireland include a co-edited volume on gender and history, Ireland 1852 to 1922, who co-edited a book with Professor Eunan on India, Ireland and anti-imperial struggle, remembering the Connaught Ranger mutiny of 1920. And now I introduce our second speaker, Professor Eunan. He is Professor Emeritus of Contemporary Irish History at Trinity College, Dublin. He is also a member of Royal Irish Academy and Fellow of Trinity College, Dublin. Educated at University College, Dublin and with PhD from the University of Cambridge. He is a specialist in 20th century British and Irish history and also in intelligence and security studies. Among his key works are Defending Ireland, the Irish State and its Enemies since 1922, Spying on Ireland, British Intelligence and Irish Neutrality during the Second World War. Now I would request His Excellency Ambassador of India, Shri Akhilesh Mishra-ji, to give introductory remarks to today's lecture.
Thank you, Maji. My very warm greetings and very warm welcome to each one of you. Also, my sincere wishes and greetings to all friends who are connected with this program through the virtual platform. I'm very delighted to welcome my very dear friend Jyoti, visiting from India, and also Professor Atwal. I'm very delighted to also welcome, especially acknowledge the presence of Professor Jawaharlal, who is my guru. Before I came to Dublin and I was looking for study material on Ireland and Ireland-India relationship, I was given her superlative article, and that formed the basis of my understanding of India-Ireland relationship and also the historical perspective. I'm very grateful to you and friends. Thank you so much also for coming. And I must say, since I have come to Ireland, it's for 2 years, I have also been inspired to do my own research on India-Ireland relationship. And what really strikes me is that our historical experience has many very interesting parallels. Although they are not identical, but very interesting parallels. Like one thing which really strikes anybody's mind is how the people of Ireland thought of gaining independence and how India is so big and also so far from British and the European powers. Ireland is so close and so deeply intertwined in terms of socio-economic engagement with the British. So for the people of Ireland to think of the possibility of getting rid of this colonial occupation and gaining independence, that itself would have been extraordinary. And in India, we had only 400,000 British forces. In a country of that time, it was about 40 million people. The leadership of India, the people of India thought of Purna Swaraj only in 1929. Only in 1929 people of India thought of Purna Swaraj, like full independence. Otherwise, and even after that in 47 we only got a Romanian status. Whereas the people of Ireland, they got their independence, they also got a republican constitution, they also quit Commonwealth and truly became a Republic of Ireland. So the struggle for independence has very, very significant inspiring role for India. The way Ireland initiated and carried forward both on the peaceful side and also on the revolutionary side, Ireland's struggle and Ireland's people's thought leadership had profound impact. Second is when we were drafting our constitution. So people normally have a very narrow perspective of the commonalities between our two constitutions, and the directive principles of state policy is one main area which is referred to as Irish influence. Whereas there are so many times in the discussion of the Constituent Assembly that Ireland figured very prominently, and very many instances where Ireland was shown as a role model what we could have adopted, including the name of the country. How Ireland has placed the Irish name in priority to the English name. Similarly, the use of promotion of Irish language and giving it primacy. In Indian Constitution Assembly debates, these were referred to and Ireland was mentioned as example. Similarly, when the issue of continuing even after independence and even after Republican Constitution, remaining in Commonwealth, then people refer to Ireland saying that if Ireland can have best of the both worlds, remaining out of Commonwealth, why can't we do also the same thing? So there are a lot of interesting points of connect and points of inspiration that we have derived from Ireland's experience. But naturally, India's experience is extremely complex. The more I study our past, I feel our history is so complex. And one major difference between the Irish struggle and our struggle is that Ireland has only one enemy, basically, to fight. We have been colonized by many foreign forces, including the modern sense colonization. So before the British, we had Portuguese, then Dutch, then Norwegians and Danish and French, besides the British. So our colonial experience is not monolinear, it's more complex. Also, as Professor Eunan has done a lot of work on how the British managed to control occupying forces. So we have again very complex situation because India is so diverse linguistically, religion-wise, ethnicity, and if you look at plurality of religions, Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, Christianity, all of them have different fault lines among them. Hinduism itself is so diverse that you can create a lot of fissures. So it is also very interesting for me how the Britishers used the fault lines in Ireland and also different fault lines in India to reinforce their stronger hold on colonized people. Similarly, in terms of the network of informers and the British agents. Even while, and Professor Jain has spoken about, and President Dr. Higgins also has been speaking about the dual role that some people, some elements in the colonies themselves played. Like some Irish people were also part of the colonial machinery, as were some people in India who were supporting the British. and they were benefiting from their linkage with the British. So again, there are a lot of interesting, a lot of very different lines of investigation which require our attention. Today's lecture is very significant, and I'm very delighted to have a dear friend Jyoti. Jyoti is one of the very few people in India who have sustained their interest in India-Ireland relationship, and Ireland. For Ireland, she is the focal point in India. Yes, I agree with you. Thank you so much.
I hope this is on. Okay, very good evening to all of you. And sir, I'm equally delighted to be here. And so is Professor Eunan, and we were supposed to have this lecture last year, but we missed it somehow. But we are very delighted. And also, this is a new embassy, that new venue of the embassy that has opened, and I've been to the earlier one, so this looks really great. So congratulations on that. And also, we have been working, what we have been doing for the past 10 years or so, I think has borne some fruits now. That's what we think. And my dear friends who are here, so you already mentioned Professor Jenu, she's also the focal point of building the bridge, academic bridge. UCD, Professor Connor Mulwag, has been the real, weight for us, and those other friends who are here, Ida and Jivanta is here. So we have gained a lot from these associations, and we've had so many conferences and rounds of interaction in order to open up themes which are probably new, and also which go around the colonial period. And as historians, we feel it's important to go back and see how the histories were connected. And personally, for me, it has been a very self-transforming exercise to come to Ireland every time, and various universities have facilitated this. Limerick, UCD, UCU, Cork. So, and this particular visit, I have to really thank Dr. Jawaharlal here from Ireland Indian Institute. They've gathered fundings for this visit. So I'm really grateful, also to History Department at St. Pat's. So, without much delay, I'll talk about certain historical connections. And is that the first slide? Okay. Now we have various. When we talk of Indo-Irish connections, we actually talk about cultural renaissance of the 19th century. We have to go back to the late 19th century for looking at some spiritual connections. And when we say spiritual, it's not only religious, but also religious in the sense that there were women from Ireland who were inspired by the ongoing cultural and spiritual journeyings of the late 19th century. And two of the most influential ideas came from, one of the most influential was Swami Vivekananda, and you can see on the left-hand side there is Margaret Noble. And Margaret Noble was also known as Sister Nivedita, who's very, very much driven to this force. She came to India, and she's a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. So it opened up the doors for a very different negotiation at a very different level, which was group-based, and it had at that point no direct links with independent movement, but later on that of course evolved into a lot more, as it did in India, and so it did in Ireland. Then we have Annie Besant on the right-hand side. Annie Besant, who was the founder, was a more political person, and she was the founder of the Theosophical Society, who appeared in India primarily as a president of the Theosophical Society, which had headquarters then in New York, and was founded by Madame Blavatsky. Now, working with the principle, there is universalism of humanity. All religions carry these principles. this body was not too popular because it basically wasn't a religious, it didn't really symbolize festivities and culture and rituals and so on. But at the same time, it brought together a lot of Western interest in India. That is what it did. And Annie Besant was also directly involved in the Indian national movement. She was the first ever woman to be the president of the INC, Indian National Congress, which was that time shaping up. Its ideas, they were divided into moderates and extremists. I won't go into that. But at the same time, she is the first one to make a bit of transition from that moderate leadership to an extremist, so-called extremist leadership, in the sense of understanding it, taking it a bit forward than just petitioning the British for certain rights, for saying, for also opening up the arena of Home Rule League. And the Home Rule League was basically a very interesting idea. As you know, it was, she wanted to prepare the Indian people after the First World War for some kind of independence and for some kind of home rule, essentially, which would be under the British rule but guided by them, not completely disconnected with them. But at the same time, the Indian people would rule. For that, she thought education was a main vehicle for that. And that's what she wanted to do, and she opened up the colleges, Theosophical College was very important. And however, after 1918, we know that things took a very ugly turn in India, and the promises were not kept by the British, and there was mass violence in India in the shape of Jawaharlal Bagh, and over 1,000 people were shot dead. And we know that the Irish situation, in Ireland, people were watching that, people were looking at the trial very closely. I've seen some very interesting newspaper reports. But however, in terms of the result of all this was that sooner or later, the idea of home rule was replaced with passive resistance and non-cooperation of Gandhiji. And therefore, this event, there was a different turn of events at that point of time. So, interestingly, this kind of history is of course very well known in India. It is a general trajectory with which we relate when we talk about Ireland. And of course, Gandhiji did not really want the movement to go the violent way. He did recommend passive resistance and self-reliance, and particularly dependent on weaving, and also promoted the charkha, the spinning wheel, to help reconstruction of the Indian economy, which was really damaged first by the famines and the floods in different parts, and also the First World War, which had cost India a lot. When we move on to the other phase, what is very interesting is this other Irish lady who was from Boyle Roscommon, whom I have been researching and I've been writing a biography of hers, is Margaret Cousins. She was basically a suffragette in Dublin who moved from Boyle, and she belonged to the Church of Ireland. And I have been connecting various threads, first with the spiritual 19th century that she belonged to, and her husband James Cousins, who is very important and interesting. Please move on. We have not, interestingly, there were some articles which I found, but not really a full book on her. There was, but in 1994, during President Mary Robinson's time, this was a letter which she wrote, and there was some brief exchange that happened during that period. She congratulated the All India Women's Conference, which Margaret Cousins had started. I'll tell you what Margaret Cousins was doing in India. She moved in 1915 with her husband to join Annie Besant's various projects. One of them was opening of New India, a newspaper, a very important newspaper, and later on they stayed on, they were requested to stay on to also lead a school, and then also lead a college. And eventually, James Cousins led a very important music school and culture school in the South. So their engagement was still very much interesting and important. But to begin with, we have had no celebration or nothing around them till 1994. So after 1994, with this brief letter and brief visit of AIWC members to Ireland, Boyle, this very symbolic and ritualistic exchange didn't fructify to anything more, unfortunately. And everything died down after that, after the celebration. And this is a letter by her congratulating. And then, please, next, please. Okay. So this was the, this is just some photographs which I'll just run through. Could you please, yeah. This was the Home Rule League, the purpose, and why was it led, which I've already spoken about. Yeah. Now, this is a very interesting moment in this particular school. Now, Margaret Cousins was had a bachelor's in music, and in Madanpalle, which is on Andhra Pradesh in south of India, she was somebody who, with her husband, she was teaching there, doing nothing very important. But she in 1917 had been asked by the women to draft the first women's voting rights bill in India, which of course it was rejected by the South Borough Committee, which visited India, saying that Indian women were not educated enough to be able to vote. So, in the light of that fact, this right cannot be given to them. Only educated people should have the right. Well, that was of course contested later on by a series of delegations. But in 1919, this very important and interesting cultural where Rabindranath Tagore, who was on the panel of the college, he came to inspect the college, and he had earlier written Jana Gana Mana, which was in Bengali Sanskrit, this song. And later on, in 1919, in Madanpalle, he translated it to English, known as the Morning Song of India. He told Margaret Cousins, who had this degree to music, we actually sing it in Sanskrit. We don't sing it in English. But this is an important juncture, I thought, that a woman from the West should be given this task, and this kind of trust should be given to a Western woman to do this. I was just looking at the kind of exchange and kind of trust and cultural bridges that were, made during this period. Could you have the next slide, please? We'll talk more about that. This is the plaque that in 1994 was put by All India Women's Conference, and it commemorates the work of Margaret Cousins. And interestingly, on 7th of November this year, this 7th of November, it is the 145th birth anniversary of Margaret Cousins, and I'm very delighted. I'm going to Boyle to kind of commemorate that and celebrate the King's House, which was a main recruiting ground for the Connaught Rangers, the book is about. And so this is one thing. This, as you can see, this plaque is in between two buildings. Now those two buildings are there because both buildings belong to Margaret Cousins' house. And she was actually a Gillespie, and her father was clerk of petty sessions. So, and she had been very well trained in politics. She had seen Charles Stewart Parnell speak from that particular place. And she would read out some news to her father from the paper and discuss politics with him, although there was a lot of patriarchy in the house. That's what she says in her 800-page memoir with her husband. So, next please. Okay, this is then and now picture, the clock tower there, and still looking spectacular. Please have the next one. Now, she was a very important suffragette also, and in some of my work, what I found out about her was that her training in Ireland was crucial to her understanding of the situation in India. Although she realized that it can't be the same kind of activism that was there, that she had been experienced, that she had gone through, she had been trained to in All India, Irish Women's Franchise League, which she founded with one of the leading women called Hannah She Stephenson. And this is one of the most very important periods, 1913, where there was a lockout, and then there was, the Tolomo prison incident where these women were sent to jail for 1 full month. So often, this is something which is well known about the suffragettes, that they would, when they were in jail, they would do some memorable, to commemorate the jail moment, they would either embroider or make something so that it lives on. So all the 4 of these women who went to jail had actually embroidered their names around that. And there's a bit of a story around this particular thing. I'm very grateful to Professor Eunan here, who introduced me to Professor Barbara Wright, who's no longer with us sadly. And I'm very grateful to Professor Barbara Wright of Trinity College. She was teaching in the French department. And, she shared this with her, and the lady you see there was Barbara Hoskins, and she was a grandmother of Barbara Wright. So she shared a very personal piece of information with me here. Which is, of course, she said it was not common for anyone to go out and put this in public, this kind of Jyoti tree cloths. So she shared it with me. I'm very privileged that I had she gave me some rights to talk about it and show it in public. Next, please. These are the newspaper reports. She was, went to the jail when Margaret was, she was all over the news. This is a letter from her in 1920. There were several letters. They are in the Hannah Sheet Skeffington collection in NLI, which I found, and some of them were actually most of them were to Hannah Sheet Skeffington, where she kept describing how south of India, the water and the atmosphere is quite similar to Dublin, but not quite the same. So she kept comparing the air and water and everything. So, but at the same time, she was so much in touch, and she was connected with the events of 1916. And both the husband and wife didn't have a very favorable view of this, and said didn't think it was needed, the Easter Rising, and it was quite bloody in that sense. But at the same time, as we all know, the outcome was more bloody than the Easter Rising itself, and with the executions that took place. I think that they changed, they had a very mixed statement after that. I won't go into the details of that, but I think it influenced them very differently. Also, the seances, they were recalling the seances that they had with the group of Yeats. They were a group of A.E. and Yeats. And one, she says she had actually done an automatic writing in one of them. And she told Hannah about it, that the husband had actually been shot dead in 1916, mistakenly, by the British. So she came and she said, Frank came to me and he did this writing and so on. So she hadn't really forgotten her group and some of the things that she did in Dublin. But when she came to India, interestingly, she of course could not carry forward that, but she was very much one with the 1917 movement for self-reliance and so on, promoting the Indian products. And that's what I thought was very interesting, the Sri Dharma which she launched along with Annie Besant. Although Annie Besant was more dominant here because she was very senior and the main person at this 1917, when she was interned in Madras, she was more popular. And their way of advertising this would be to buy the Indian products, not buy the British products, and so on. So that was, I thought was very connecting and very adaptive of the Indian situation, rather than she knew that some of those things could not be had. Could we just next one? Yeah. So another important thing was 1923. She was appointed as the first woman magistrate of India, where it was a civil court, not a criminal court, and she would decide on several matters. As you see, there is the priest sitting along, deciding on several matters here. And the appointment was a bit strange because it came in the peak non-cooperation period, and which would also mean not taking up the jobs, such jobs and such positions. But she says in her memoir that she took it up because it was offered by a local Raja who was Indian. So she didn't mind taking up the jobs offered by them. That it was he who had proposed making her this. I must say also princely states was very much close to the south. These princely states were quite progressive. At the same time, they wanted to make certain decisions, such as appointment of certain chairs, certain people, education, etc. They were quite open to doing this. And we also have Begum Bhopal, who's again a Muslim kingdom, also very open to things. And also the bars that we see in 1911 in Delhi and so on. They are actually told the power, the kind of power these princely states bring to the British. The British wanted to see them there because that would be the ultimate recognition of power of the British. If they also arrived at that venue to show their or pay their allegiances. So it was a very, very, I think one has to actually go back and see how complicated this was. And for a Western woman to arrive and decide on the cases, I'm trying to work more on the cases she decided. Unfortunately, I don't find many. So I have to go down again to South to do that. Can we have the next one, please? This is one of the late 1930s pictures where she's sitting with Dr. Muthu Lakshmi Reddy, who's the first woman legislator of India, and she writes about Margaret Cousins in great praise. She has very nice words about her, and I think this is a very new variety of feminism that emerged, which was not maternal feminism, as some of the scholars have called, the Western women coming to India as maternal imperialists, not. So this is actually emerging out of that. And in 1936, can we have the next one, please? Just the last. As 1936. As president of the All India Women's Conference, she said something very interesting. She said, "I am now an Indian," and she's labeled herself as Indian by now. And she was very. And in between, she also wrote about the hum of the charkha, which is about Gandhian method, and also a detailed article about how Gandhiji had. Actually later, started this charkha, and how British had actually exploited India. So she had all this data with her, and Jane's cousins too. In the end, I would like to say that there's one last slide which I would like to show. If you please move on. This is another meeting that she has. This is a jail, the Lord Women's Jail, where she was imprisoned for 1 full year. And later on, after independence of India, she was awarded she was given the award for fighting for freedom of India. She was in this jail, which was a newly opened jail for women at that point of time. The last one. This is her jail record, and it could easily be commuted to through money. If she paid 5,000 rupees, she wouldn't have to spend that 1 year in jail. But she chose to go to jail because that was the whole idea. And in between 1930 and 33, there were a lot of women who were in jail for civil disobedience movements, participating in that movement. And after independence, they were all awarded for fighting for the country as freedom fighters. So Margaret Cousins was one of them. But she was a lot more than that. She was also an activist for against child marriage and education of women, women's rights, etc. And also, there's some things that we are trying to also explore, such as her views on abortion, etc. We're trying to look at that, although there's a lot more work to be done. And with that, I end my talk. And sorry, taken a long time for this. So I hand over to Professor Eunan.
colleagues, and friends in the audience. I'm very glad to be here today. It's a great honour to be in the Embassy in India. It's also gives the opportunity to thank not only Jyoti but her colleagues in JNU, Mirza Mukherjee and others for helping me so much when I was a researcher there in JNU in 2012. That wasn't my first visit to India, because in 2005 I was brought to Calcutta and was briefly a celebrity. I was on the rolling news on Star Television, I think it was, and elsewhere, because I was brought over by the Bowles family to reveal material which I had found in British intelligence records relating to a British scheme to assassinate Sullis Chandra Bowles in 1941. And I thought today I would talk about the Bowles experience, but also in relation to in some ways a parallel figure, Roger Casement, and I'll try to explain in the course of my talk why I'm doing this. So perhaps if we could go, it would be better. Now, I'm out of practice with high technology, and I was never much good. In fact, look what's happened. Just to mention what about Casement, I've summarised here. I thought I was going to click up. Anyway, it doesn't matter. To explain about Roger Casement for those of you who don't know about him or don't remember. Casement is in some ways a magnetic figure. He's a subject of intense interest to many writing about the Irish Revolution and so on. He was initially an Irish born but a British consular official. As a British official, he was sent firstly to the Belgian Congo and later to the Peruvian Amazon to investigate the condition of indigenous workers essentially under colonial rule. And there is an irony and a paradox that Casement himself became almost a celebrity internationally. He was by the standards of a consular officer. In the British system in those days, the consuls were not diplomats. They were a much lower form of life. They were there to deal with drunken sailors, to deal with trade issues, to deal with sort of the banalities of international commerce, and they had no input into policy. But Casement, paradoxically, through being used by Britain as a human rights investigator, not of the British Empire, you may know, but of other people's empires and other people's colonialisms, in fact, got extraordinarily well treated. He didn't seek it, but he got extraordinary preferment. He got the most prestigious diplomatic honour. He was made a member of the Order of Commander of St. Michael of St. George, CMG, and then he was knighted in 1911, which there were very few knighthood given to the consular official at all, and mostly they would have been given this all about class and caste, if you like, in the British system. They would have been given a KBE, right, which is at the bottom. If you're offered a KBE, take it, but don't think it's as big an honour as a KCMG, which is what Casement got. So the paradox was this man, as he became radicalised, not only in terms of cultural nationalism, but politically, was simultaneously being rewarded, if you like, by the British, and they actually send aspects of his findings in relation especially to Peru. They send them to colonial governors and advise them to tell their colonial subjects, don't go to South America, to work as labourers, going to be very badly treated. Stay under us, and of course we look after you very well. That's as elsewhere to specify. There's a certain irony in this. But there's a parallel with Casement, with Sullis Chandra Bowles, whom I will mainly focus on, in that Casement, like Bowles, they are both in some sense undone by new technology. They're undone by telegraphy and by wireless telegraphy. And they're undone in this sense, that their plans for if you like, for subversion, respectively, of Ireland and of India, are betrayed to the British, not by informants. In the Irish narrative, the informer has always been the problem with Irish rebellions, but they were actually betrayed by their patrons. Because in the case of Casement, the British from 1915 are able to read German diplomatic reports from Washington to Berlin and German diplomatic telegrams, if you like, and therefore they become aware that Irish conspirators in America are liaising with the German embassy in Washington to make arrangements for German support for an Irish rebellion. And they're aware in the case of Casement that he's going to leave Germany by submarine and land on the southwest coast of Ireland just before the rebellion itself. So all that disclosure comes not, as I say, from the traditional motif of the informer, in the corner, who's taking money from the colonial, the imperial authority, but it comes through the technical inadequacies of the great power to whom you've entrusted your life, because the German codes weren't good enough, right? And this is to be a recurrent theme when we get to Substantial Rose, which in some ways is the more interesting figure. And just finally, to finish about Casement, there's 2 points. There are parallels again with Bowes in relation to how he's treated not only in nationalist sentiment, I would almost say, throughout the 20th century. One of the difficulties with Casement was that during his trial, the British authorities claimed to find, I think they did find, secret diaries he kept, which were, if you like, homoerotic in nature. That he was homosexual, and also, to quote an Ulster Unionist councillor in Belfast, who was himself gay, that not only was Casement gay, but he was, by today's standards, a paedophile. He's writing about boys in South America, who, if you believe the diaries he had picked up and had sexual encounters with. And there is, in some ways, a parallel with Bowes, because in terms of Substantial Bowes in India, where he remains a very potent figure politically, and his memory is, there remains a school of thought which argues, contrary to what the Bowes family say, the honour of knowing, especially Professor Sagata Bowes of Harvard, Bowes, while in Germany, in the early 1940s, became very close to his secretary, Emily Schenk, and they had a daughter. His daughter was actually born, he never saw her. She was born just after he left Germany in 1943 for the Far East. But there are some who see Bowes as such a hero, such an icon of fighting, giving his whole life to Indian independence, that he would never have bothered with that, with the flesh, if you like. I think it's very unfortunate. Emily Schenk, her daughter, I think is still alive. The family have accepted her, but yet there are ultra-nationalists who say no, Bowes would never have touched a woman because he was dedicated solely to, if you like, to India. Anyway, so I thought I'd just flag Casement as a kind of parallel. This isn't very well worked out. Can we click on? Go ahead. Okay. I don't know what these were set to come up one at a time, but I'll just run through here. Who Substantial Bowes was, many of you will know a lot about him. If you land at the airport in Kolkata, it's named after him. There are statues of him and of his brother Sarat all over Calcutta and elsewhere, as we will see. And he was from a wealthy family. He was highly educated. He studied first in Calcutta, and then he went to Cambridge for a year. He was being prepared to join the British Indian, if you like, administrative elite. He was being prepared to join the Indian Civil Service, the ICS, and to join it not as a clerk or as a clerical worker, but as one of the small group of Indians who will be trusted, as it were, with higher administration and with leadership and so on within the British system. And of course, he decided that this was not for him. Partly because looking across the water at Ireland, he decided that India, the case for Indian independence, was overwhelming, and he believed that it might well come to having to fight for it rather than simply having to ask for it. That's why throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, as he becomes a very significant political figure in India and in the Indian National Congress, he spent a long time in jail. And I don't know what Irish jails were like. Accounts of them, suggest they weren't that great. They're still not that great, right? But as compared with the conditions which even elite figures like Bose or Nehru or Gandhi, but the conditions in which they were typically imprisoned were very much more severe. And in Bose's case, he got respiratory disease, tuberculosis through imprisonment, which absolutely, it didn't quite kill him, but it certainly shattered him, which is one of the reasons why in the mid-1930s he came to Europe. And in Europe he visited, amongst other places, he visited Germany, he visited Italy, and he visited Ireland. And he said afterwards, as he should do, that Ireland was, of course, was the highlight of his trip abroad. He may well have said the same in Vienna, of course, and in Berlin, you know. But he certainly had very perhaps naive and generalised admiration for the Irish Revolution. When he comes here, he's in the hands, if you like, of a very radical Republican coterie of men and women. But he also meets Mr. De Valera, of course, the best-known figure. But he also meets William Cosgrave, who's the leader of the opposition and who had been on the other side of the Irish Civil War. So, as appropriate, really, as a visitor, he doesn't get into the ins and outs of the split within Irish nationalism, and nor does he focus on partition, which, of course, in the Indian context as well, was to be an enormous and in some ways very unexpected and dramatic element of the Indian independence narrative. Politically, he appears to be a socialist / moving towards communist in terms of policy as the 1930s progresses. And he becomes, there's no doubt, I think, he becomes impatient with aspects of the Congress leadership, both with Nehru and with Gandhi. For, I think, a range of reasons. Gandhi, partly because, increasingly because of the entirely specific nature of the kind of protest movement that he wants to lead, and Nehru perhaps also, but also to do with the degree to which a free India would be socialist and so on. As I've summarised there, by 1938, although he's president of Congress in 1938, he then falls out with Gandhi and with Nehru, and he takes his own, basically it becomes his own movement, the Forward Bloc, and he basically splits from Congress. By then the British are watching him very closely, amongst other things, as we'll see if I ever get to the end of this, by reading the communications of Japanese consuls in India, and later on of Italian, German and Japanese diplomats in Afghanistan, which becomes part of the story. But I'll just take all that as read, because it's another 3 hours in which to do it. Well, so there's Casement there. There's an unusual picture of Natasha. Now, I just took that from the internet. I take it on faith that that's an accurate picture of him with members of a legion, what's called the Indian Legion in Germany, formed from Indian prisoners of war. And it was actually the formation of it preceded Bose coming to Germany, but he in a sense, took over leadership once he arrived. And there's a parallel there again with Casement, because Casement, while he travels to Germany after the war breaks out, and he tries to raise an Irish brigade to fight for Irish freedom from British prisoners of war. It's a pretty miserable disaster of a shambles of an exercise for Casement. Bose's experience, particularly in the Far East, was far more, if you like, successful. That I mentioned this, the issue, the gay issue, and again, it remains an issue in what I might call narrow-minded political / historical discourse, at least on the internet, whether Bose would ever have had, given in to carnal or emotional, whatever, connections with anybody. I should say also, there's, unlike Casement, everybody accepts that Casement died. He was executed in August 1916. His remains were returned to Ireland in 1965, and at a time when it looked as though this gesture was hugely appreciated, and it almost marked the end of the old bitterness between Britain and Ireland. This is before the Northern Troubles. But for Bose, there remains huge controversy as to whether or not he died in August 1945 in Saipan. in an air crash, well, after an air crash in hospital. And the most recent Indian government inquiry, not the first, has concluded that he didn't die in August 1945. I'm not as distinguished as Judge Mukherjee, who chaired it, and I'm not in some ways qualified to comment. My own view, he is, I'm pretty sure he did die, rather than as some believe that he reached the Soviet Union, which was his aim, and then fell into the hands of sort of the Soviet system, and therefore was held like Raoul Wallenberg, the Swede, was held, in chains until he died. But so there is, Bose remains a totemic figure in Indian politics, but also his historical narrative is disputed. You can see the end of the Mukherjee report of 2005 says we concluded that he didn't die in that crash. Now, to jump forward, how I got into this is that I was working through the records of the British Code-Breaking Agency for other purposes, and because of the way the records are organised on a day-by-day alphabetical basis, I was reading, and they have headers. You get a list of headers alphabetically day by day, and then you go and you find the corresponding document. I came across this document from Kabul or Kabul. It's bad, it's not a very good photograph, just for my own purposes. It's an Italian diplomatic telegram from Coroni, who was the Italian representative in Kabul, to Rome. It was sent on the 24th of February, and by the 28th of February, the British had intercepted it, decoded it, translated it, and distributed it. It shows you that their code-breaking could be quite efficient. And you see there it mentions Bose, and that tells the British he's in Kabul. They didn't know where he'd gone. They knew he'd escaped from Calcutta, but they didn't know where. So now they knew. So if you're going to keep a secret amongst other countries, you don't tell the Italians, right? Unless you confession, you can tell an Italian priest. And then the result of this was that this stimulates action in Britain to quote these records at the highest possible level. In other words, from the Prime Minister. In March 41. A British secret organisation, Special Operations Executive, are told to kill Bose. They think he's going to go through Turkey, right? Because they think they're not sure where he's headed. They assume he's headed for the Soviet Union because they see him as a leftist, but he might be going towards Germany, and so they say to kill him. And these officers are told to wire what arrangements they can make for his assassination, as though it's like arranging this talk. That's it's really easy to do. And this is reiterated in June 41. They don't know by then where Bose is because their sources of information, in a sense, dry up. But you see that in June 41, the order was repeated in Turkey because they think he's in Turkey. But of course, that's wrong. By then, Bose was in the Soviet Union because he'd been helped to escape from Afghanistan by the Italians, the Germans, and the Soviets collectively, but he'd gone to Moscow, and then luckily for him, he went to Berlin just before Barbarossa. But what's interesting here, of course, is the name. It's one of these, I believe in coincidences rather than conspiracies. You may see the name there. Jawaharlal de Chastelain was the SOE secret agent, if you like, in Turkey at the time. He had been in Romania, where his son John de Chastelain was born. Then when Romania came into the war on the Axis side, he went to Turkey. And there's his son, General John de Chastelain, getting an award this year from our President, Michael D. Higgins, because although his father was a British agent and would-be assassin, General de Chastelain played a very important part in the Irish peace process as a Canadian retired general in terms of the arms decommissioning exercise. So you have this curious link, but that's life. And much of what I see is much of disputes which focus on conspiracies and connections. I think mostly it's just chance. Just to move on, I'm probably out of time, Chair, but just to mention that although the assassination plan doesn't work, as Bose is already beyond Britain's grip, it is interesting that they continue to keep watch Bose, and they're able to continue because they can also read Japanese traffic. This is a Japanese diplomatic telegram from Tokyo to Berlin. And what they're doing is they're relaying a message from Bose's brother Sarat, who remains in Calcutta, where he's a leading lawyer, but he's also talking to the Japanese. And the Japanese have still a consulate in India in September 41 because war hasn't broken out as far as they're concerned. So they tell Tokyo, they send messages from Calcutta to Berlin via Tokyo. And as I say, the British are able to read this material. So again, put the Japanese on your list of states who truly shouldn't tell secrets for fear the British are listening. But you see here, this is a memo. If you ever get a letter signed in green ink marked C, you will know. I don't know if you received it, but in the British system, this means that it comes from C, the head of the British Secret Service, MI6. In the Bond films, it's M, but in reality, it's C. It's a short English. So you see there, the handwriting almost as bad as mine. You'll see the letters. The colour is important because only the Prime Minister uses red, or Churchill, that's Churchill, WSC. And the point is, in the midst of other woes, and how important, in fighting this war on all fronts, at a time when Britain is doing really badly, it's still worth the Secret Service's while to give Churchill a document relating to India, relating to the Bose brothers and to India. So he's always on their radar and so on. Again, in 43, Bose is in Germany, but he finds the Germans unsympathetic. He has the nerve, when he meets Hitler, to criticise what Hitler had said about India in Mein Kampf, because Hitler's quite dismissive of Indians. He says they're no good, they won't fight for their freedom, and they really are a supporter of the people. Hitler, of course, was ultimate racist anyway. And Bose offended the Fuhrer by, in a sense, politely pointing this out. But Germany, it turns out, aren't going to be, he reckons, much used to him. He can't go to the Soviets, but they're now on the other side. So he wants the Japanese to receive him as they do receive him back in the Far East. And that's where he reaches like the height of his power. But the thing is, again, through code breaking, this is just one example. The British know about the arrangements. They know the details of the submarine that he leads on. Eventually, they know the arrangements with the Germans. Apparently, 2 submarines meeting at sea is a complicated matter. It's not like just 2 rowboats. And there's also the technical issues. But they actually make the transfer somewhere near Madagascar. And the British take a decision not to intercept it for fear if they turn up in the middle of the ocean to destroy these tempting targets. 2 submarines, somebody in Berlin or in Tokyo would realize they must be reading our messages. So they don't actually try to get Bose on that trip, even when they had very precise things of where the 2 submarines were to be. So through all that, Bose gets back to the Far East. In Singapore, he declares a free India government as a hind or hind. He also forms an Indian National Army, which, unlike Casement's Irish Brigade, is a relatively serious enterprise with something like 75 or 80,000 men. These would be Indian soldiers who had been captured in Malaya and Fall, Singapore and elsewhere. And the Indian National Army does actually do some fighting alongside the Japanese, especially in Burma in 1944 and 45. It even has a regiment of women who, there was a terrific interview with the doctor, I can't remember her surname now, who was the leader of it and complains in the Indian sort of national oral history, independence. She complains about the way they're treated because they are written out of history. Because they aren't allowed near the front line, because so the Japanese, regard women soldiers as very, beyond the pale, and the Indian male soldiers aren't much better, but which is an interesting sideline. But it's also interesting that Bose did, and these are all women, young women from the Indian diaspora, right, who agree to go and fight for a free India, where a place they've never been and never seen. It's very interesting. And links it to some extent to issues to do with gender and women's rights, so which are much more socially few than mine. So in all of it, but obviously what I'm doing as an historian is problematic, because I'm seeing my sources are all second-hand, if you like. Even I obviously don't speak Japanese, so I'm relying on the competence of British translators and so on. I take the documents to be authentic, and so on. But my argument would be for Casement and for Bowes. In both cases, people, a lot of their schemes, a lot of their plans are portrayed not with the traditional motif of the person taking the money to get, to sell the story and to sell the story, but the paradox is they're taken by supposedly technologically sophisticated power to whom they turn for assistance. And just as WikiLeaks has shown us in more recent years and so on, if you want to keep the secret nowadays, don't tell the Americans, because they'll mark it top secret. They will put it in a computer somewhere. They'll get a 21-year-old private soldier and give him complete access to it, right? And so on. So therefore, revolutionaries should be careful not only as informers, but are relying on supposedly technology advanced great powers. So, can I do my little right from here? Yeah, just finally to mention, this is a rather ragged discussion, so I'll finish it with a bit of elegance and a bit of art. As recently as 1921, or 2021, Ireland in Dunleary erected a statue to Roger Casement. And Casement remains in the Irish discourse. In some ways, there are issues with Casement because it's highly likely that he was gay, right? I don't think the idea, the disgrace, that the shame upon Britain isn't that they pretended Casement was gay, is that they used the fact of him being gay after his trial and before his execution to discredit him. And also the British cabinet that agreed to his execution, which I think personally had to execute. But that's another matter. But at least three of them around the table, cabinet table, who said, no, we can't give him any mercy. At least three of them themselves were notoriously homosexual or queer or whatever the term at the time was, but I suppose that's life. So anyway, we have Casement here, and in India last year, near in Delhi, the Prime Minister Modi unveiled a very fine statue to Subhash Chandra Bose. Now, it's not the first statue of Subhash Chandra Bose in India. There are a remarkable number of them, particularly, as I mentioned, in Calcutta. But generally, Bose has become an enormously important icon for, if you like, for a narrative of Indian independence, of Indians, if you like, who didn't simply protest for freedom, but who attempted to fight for freedom. Now, that in itself is in some ways controversial, because in India, unlike in Ireland, as an outsider, it looks as though it was the predominantly non-violent wing of the independence movement who were successful. Most of the violence, I was said, in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in India related to Indian independence did not come from Indians, or if it came from Indians, it was from Indian policemen or Indian soldiers. You mentioned Ritsar in 1919, and the list goes on, because they most of the physical force and most of the deaths were inflicted by authority, by British authorities, by colonial authority, rather than by Indian rebels. So, Ambassador, as usual, I got on too long, so I think I should end. Thank you.
Any thoughts, comments, questions? Yes.
I wonder, Eunan, what do you think that Bose was so much more successful recruiting the INA from Indian prisoner of war in Japanese captivity than Casement was trying to do the same among Irish prisoners in Germany in the First World War?
I think that's a very good question. we have to remember that there were in some ways a lot more prisoners of war from whom to choose because Casey was in Germany, not only a prisoner of war in Germany, whereas you have many thousands of Indian soldiers who had left their homeland under the usual promise that we will look after their families and so on, and you'll be back soon. And I think as has happened in 1915 in Singapore, there was a generalised resentment within some of the Indian units. It's one thing to defend your homeland, but it's a rather different thing when you're sent abroad to defend some place you've never heard of, and then to be so overwhelmed so quickly, and overwhelmed not by another European power. And this was a very powerful element of Japanese successes in the early 1940s, but by an Asian power, right? And now Japan, certainly most of the Congress leaders were very critical of Japan before the war because of their actions in China, right? Where I think Indian sentiment generally was very much with China against Japan as Japan came in its own sort of exercising, you might argue, of imperialism. But I think so many. What's very interesting about I've read quite a few interviews with Indian veterans who did join Bose's enterprise in the Indian National Army, if you like, and most of them, particularly General Mohan Singh, who was one of the figures chosen to be tried for treason in the Red Fort trials in 1945-46. Mohan Singh absolutely loved his time from the late 1920s in the Indian Army. He thought the British officers were great. He absolutely wasn't. It wasn't that he was disaffected or that he'd become a communist or any ideological influence. It was that their whole world was shattered by the absolute collapse, the dramatic collapse of British power in the theatre in which they were fighting. And this looked an exciting effort because he was a Punjabi, he was a nationalist, and this looked like this really was a chance because Japan, after all, just swept not only the British but the Dutch and in effect the French. The French were kind of tolerated into China for a while, and they swept them away just like that within a year, and America as well, of course, it looked like it. So I think that there's a whole variety of reasons, but you did get a very substantial cohort. That's the first point. Secondly, and it's interesting if you go to, I haven't been there since 2012, but the museum at the Red Fort, it's the museum beside it, it's very much focused in terms of the Second World War was on the INA, the Indian National Army. There's almost no reference to the about 2 million Indian soldiers, sailors and airmen who fought against the Japanese. I mean, the defeat of the Japanese in Assam and so on in 1944-45 was very largely the Indian Army, right? So it's Indians who are fighting them, and it's the British Indian Army. Which I did have an interview with one retired politician, an extraordinary man who had been Foreign Minister, Defence Minister, Finance Minister, Jawaharlal Singh, who was a BJP minister, but had written a very interesting book on Jinnah, the Muslim leader. And I asked him why was this imbalance between the Indian National Army and public commemoration and why wasn't there more parallel emphasis on the millions of Indians and so on who had fought for the British Empire. But he was inclined to think it was less politics than it was just what he then said. This was then, and I'm sure it's not like that now, but this kind of sheer inefficiency that the museums, hadn't recalibrated and so on. I don't know if that's the case or not. But the court judgment was quite an independent-minded man in some ways. I think he gave me that impression, and that's what I heard about him. He spoke of Bengalis he spoke of the romantic Bengali psyche in relation to Bose and the focus on Bose. But again, he's gone. I think he had a stroke and then he died just 2 years ago, I think. one of the many things I regret in India is that I had an introduction to it, but I didn't use it until early December when I was there. I should have gone to see it earlier, and then I would have been able to go and see it again. Now, having, of course, I would have prepared better, would have had better questions for it. But maybe that's very well.
Secrets of Putumayo and his royal placement case has been very well documented by his picture from the Brazilian film that we had screened recently, The Secret of Putumayo.
Yeah.
And in that they really focused on the work of how royal placement has been actually, the whole personality and how he was critical about the cruelty of the empire there.
The scholarship group. Yeah.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful black and white documentary that we screened recently. The other documentary that we recently screened in my film festival is on the Margaret Noble, Margaret Cousins, recently, 2 days ago, on Saturday. And it's made by Department of Foreign Affairs here in Ireland. Yeah, you must watch it, that film. It's a half-an-hour short film. And so there's historical links, there are a lot of figures which has not been documented visually and audiovisually, and that's worthwhile actually an exercise to explore and think that they can be made to make that linkage between Ireland and India. Similarly, you mentioned in your book, but the original book of Mutiny of Connaught Rangers that I worked on treatment is a beautiful story of Jim Daly from County Westmeath, who was executed in Jalandhar at the time of the mutiny here in Ireland.
Yeah, the Secretary of Emery was elected.
That's right. That's right. So he was executed, and the whole regiment, the Connaught Rangers, was suffering because of that. Because of it. He was a young man, and he was receiving a letter from his home country that his home country has been rampant by the Black Italians and the atrocities are happening here. And this is an extraordinary story that has not been made yet for television or audiovisual.
Well, it's worth saying as well, on the other side, people who most kept track of those 1930s in India was a man called Sir Charles Teagard.
Charles Teagard.
Right? Graduate inevitably of Trinity College, Dublin, and an Irishman. The man in London who was in charge of keeping watch of Indian subversions and their international connections across the world was Philip Vickery. Inevitably, was a graduate of Trinity College, Dublin. The police chief in Calcutta in the 1930s, Sir Patrick Kelly, an Irishman.
That's right.
A Catholic Irishman. The Lieutenant Governor of the Punjab in 1919, who to his dying day in Caxton Hall in 1940 when he was assassinated, was Sir Michael Dwyer, an Irish Catholic nationalist, right? If you look at on the web at the Mopla or Mopilla rebellion in southern India in 1921-22, right? There's different ways of looking at it, but it basically is, you could argue, is it part of the independence struggle? Is it an agrarian dispute between Muslim peasants and the Hindu land ownership? If you go to extreme Hindu websites, they praise the British Army for putting down the rebellion, which they did with great brutality. The leading unit in putting that down was the Leinster Regiment, right? And where Captain McElroy, who was from County Leitrim, I think, promoted through the ranks in the First World War, had 2 DSOs, and he personally is said to have killed over 30 rebels. So it's the Irish story. Is a mixed story.
The first document has been written by T.B. Kilfeather.
That's right.
He wrote the Mutiny of Connaught Rangers. The very first document. And of course, our own writer here, what's her name, Dr. She's a writer. She's written another book. Novelist. Covery Mother. That's right. Covery wrote it. And interesting, after we discussed that, and she said, I must pick up this subject and we must write on that. So there's a very interesting parallel, and there are very interesting, dichotomy between Irish history and colonial part of that. Because our Irish civil servants, graduating from Trinity College, were in bed with the British Circus.
Yeah, and not only Trinity, also in what became the National University, the Royal University. It's not simply because Trinity would have been predominantly Protestant and seen as the sort of Anglo-Irish.
That's right.
I should have mentioned Bill McGann, who in 1944-45 was effectively in Delhi, was controlling Bose's underground organisation in India. They didn't realise that he was a British officer. He's from an Irish Protestant back. I actually interviewed him. He died in 2010. But there are plenty of Irish Catholic nationalist background people as well. It's one thing to fight for Irish independence. It doesn't follow that you, unfortunately, that you carry the lesson abroad of, if you like, of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism.
Absolutely.
You know, and I dare say even for India, it might be, you might have the same complexities.
That's right.
Following on from Eunan's point, with a question for Jyoti, I was thinking about the comment you had about Margaret Noble seeing herself as Indian at a certain point, and the same thing happens in reverse for V.V. Geary, when in the 1970s he says, well, I'm not an Indian, I'm an Irishman. To what extent, in looking at this kind of study of transnational solidarity, do you see identity and even citizenship as being elective in this era of empires? Because there isn't passport holding in the way that we have it today. So to what extent can people like Margaret Noble and others decide in solidarity where they see their national heart being and moving through their lives?
I meant Margaret Cousins, not Noble.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Noble was very different.
Which is religious.
She was a part of the religious cohort, but this other one was, more free from that, and she was independent-minded. And only after Annie Besant died, she was able to speak out and actually join Gandhiji, because Annie Besant was not really, agreeable to Gandhiji's methods, etc. No, what your question is very interesting about the citizenship, and I think once she settled down in India, at least for Margaret, what I find in her writings and her work is that she thinks that she has spent enough time in the country to actually know the people, first the society, and she was working towards it. So only by associating with this kind of thing, a kind of people's association, and also she was very impressed with Gandhiji. She was also thirdly trying to internationalize the cause of Indian freedom. That was a very important aspect of that, very different from this, the other, people who go and follow a very different religion, like Bose and others. She was also appealing to the League of Nations. She was going to other conferences where women were, women's conferences where she was talking about Asian women, not just Indian. So Asia became a unit for her. So I'm not really sure if she was, really thinking of herself as an Indian. You're right. It's just a term, a very generic term in that sense, calling oneself Indian, because she's just there by location. But she's probably looking at much more universalized meaning of what an Indian was at that point of time. Somebody who's anti-colonial, somebody who has social reform, a lot of social consciousness of the reform to do, and is open to the idea of education, etc. I would think it's interesting to look at that. I would add that to my book, which is happening and will come out. So thank you so much. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Also, V.V. Giri, in your case, I mean, your work on V.V. Giri, of course, you found out. He's saying that I'm Irish. Is he saying?
In 1972, when the diplomatic visit to Kelly, he sits down with the ambassador, and this is one of his quotes back here.
Very interesting.